The first lie Alexandra told was her name, and like all the best deceptions, it contained just enough truth to feel real. Her birth certificate read Sandra Mitchell, but that girl had died metaphorically at 15 when her father's fists finally did what years of verbal abuse had threatened to do. They broke something inside her that could never be repaired. Alexandra was born from Sandra's ashes, elegant and mysterious, the kind of woman who belonged in expensive restaurants and hotel lobbies, not trailer parks in Ohio. By the time she arrived in Seattle at 22, Alexandra had perfected her origin story. She was from Boston, she claimed, with just enough knowledge gleaned from library books and Google Street View to answer casual questions. Her parents were diplomats who traveled constantly, which explained why she never called home and had no family photos. She had studied at Georgetown, a lie supported by a masterfully forged transcript she'd paid a hacker in Portland to create. The job at Morrison and Associates came easily because Alexandra had learned that confidence could mask almost any gap in knowledge. She interviewed wearing a stolen designer suit, her hair styled to perfection, speaking with the kind of educated accent she'd learned from watching hours of BBC programming. The law firm needed a paralegal, and Alexandra needed an identity that came with regular paychecks and social credibility. She told them she'd worked at a small firm in Boston that had recently closed, a story impossible to verify and therefore perfect. Marcus Morrison, the senior partner's son, was her first real mark, though she told herself it was love. He was everything Sandra from Ohio had never dreamed of touching. Harvard-educated, old money handsome, the kind of man who wore his privilege like expensive cologne. When he asked about her family, she spun tales of summers in Martha's Vineyard and skiing in Aspen. When he mentioned his friends from Georgetown, she claimed they must have run in different circles, then quickly changed the subject to art or wine or anything else she'd speed studied the night before. The engagement ring cost more than Sandra had ever seen in one place, but Alexandra accepted it as her due. She was becoming the woman she'd always been meant to be, burying her past so deeply that sometimes she almost forgot it existed. The wedding planning was elaborate, expensive, and terrifying because it required guest lists and background checks and family members who didn't exist. "My parents are traveling in Southeast Asia," she told Marcus's mother, who was growing increasingly frustrated with her inability to meet the bride's family. "They send their regrets, but the diplomatic situation is quite delicate." She hired actors to play her parents at the wedding, paying them well to memorize detailed backstories and to disappear immediately after the ceremony. The performance was flawless, and Mrs. Morrison actually complimented Alexandra on having such distinguished parents. Marriage to Marcus opened doors that Sandra could never have imagined. Charity boards, country clubs, social events where people discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes as casually as others talked about the weather. Alexandra thrived in this world because she studied it like a doctoral thesis, memorizing the names of important people, the right schools, the proper restaurants. She became more convincing in her role than many people who had been born to it. But lies require constant maintenance, and Alexandra's carefully constructed world demanded increasingly elaborate deceptions. When Marcus suggested they visit her hometown, she claimed it held too many painful memories of her recently deceased aunt. When his friends wanted to plan a reunion with Georgetown classmates, she developed mysterious health issues that prevented travel. Every holiday required new excuses for why her diplomat parents were unreachable. The pregnancy was both blessing and curse. It gave her a reason to be emotional, distracted, focused on the future rather than the past. But it also meant doctor's appointments with medical histories she couldn't provide, questions about genetic conditions she couldn't answer, and insurance forms that required information about parents who existed only in her imagination. She named the baby Victoria, after the version of herself she'd always wanted to be: victorious, triumphant, untouchable. But holding her daughter for the first time, Alexandra felt Sandra stirring beneath the surface, the girl who had been hurt and abandoned, and who knew what it meant to grow up without truth. The unraveling began 5 years later, not with dramatic exposure, but with something as simple as a background check for Victoria's private school admission. The investigator was thorough, tracing Alexandra's employment history, her educational credentials, even her parents' supposed diplomatic careers. Every thread he pulled revealed another layer of fabrication. "There's no record of your birth in Boston," Marcus confronted her one evening, his face pale with betrayal. "Georgetown has no record of you ever attending. Your parents don't exist in any diplomatic database." Alexandra, Sandra, whoever she was in that moment, felt the walls of her perfect life crumbling like cardboard in rain. She could have continued lying, could have spun new stories to explain the inconsistencies, but looking at her husband's devastated face and thinking of Victoria sleeping upstairs, she finally understood that some truths demand to be told. "My name is Sandra Mitchell," she said, her carefully cultivated accent dissolving into the flat vowels of her childhood. "I'm from Dayton, Ohio. My father was a drunk who beat me unconscious when I was 15. My mother knew and did nothing. I ran away and built Alexandra from nothing because Sandra was too broken to survive in your world." The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Marcus sat frozen, as if she'd physically struck him. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and distant, the tone he used with opposing counsel. 5 years of marriage, a child, built on complete lies." "Not complete," she whispered. "I love you. I love Victoria. That was never fake. But love built on lies is like a house constructed on sand, and their marriage collapsed within months." The divorce was brutal, with Marcus's family using her deception to argue she was an unfit mother. Alexandra, Sandra, lost custody of Victoria, lost the house, lost the life she'd spent years creating. Standing in a studio apartment that cost more per month than her father had made in 6, she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a sweatshirt. The perfect hair had grown out to reveal darker roots. The accent had disappeared entirely, leaving behind the voice she'd been born with. But something unexpected had happened in the destruction of her perfect life. For the first time in years, she felt real. The woman in the mirror wasn't Alexandra the diplomat's daughter, or Sandra the victim. She was someone new, someone who had been both those people, and was now neither. She started using her real name again, but kept some of the skills Alexandra had learned: the confidence, the education she'd given herself, the ability to move through different worlds. She got a job at a nonprofit helping women escape domestic violence, using her hard-won knowledge of reinvention to help others build new lives from the ashes of their old ones. "The trick isn't becoming someone else," she told the women in her program. "It's becoming who you really are underneath all the damage and fear. Sometimes you have to lie to the world for a while to survive, but eventually you have to tell the truth to yourself." Victoria visited every other weekend, and slowly, carefully, Sandra began telling her daughter stories about growing up poor but determined, about making mistakes but learning from them, about the difference between changing yourself and losing yourself. The child deserved to know where she came from, all of it, not just the pretty parts. The lies had given Sandra the life she thought she wanted, but only the truth had given her the life she actually needed. She was no longer the broken girl from Ohio or the perfect wife from Boston. She was Sandra Mitchell, flawed and human, and finally, authentically, real.